Hey guys, what's up? It's Melissa and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Melissa Ellen. I do these true crime videos. Now, before I talk to you about this week's video, I do like to mention what we talked about last. And the last thing we did talk about was the disappearance of Kristen Smart. She disappeared in 1996 from Cal Poly State University, and there's only one suspect, but she's still never been found. She's never been returned to her family, and there's still no closure on her case. So I will make sure I link that down below just in case you guys might know anything about it, or if you can help spread awareness in helping locate the remains or Kristen Smart herself. So I will link that for you below. This week, though, we're going to talk about a kidnapping that took place in 1976, in which 26 children, 26, and their bus driver were riding on their bus when it was taken over by three masked men. They took over the bus, they then take the children, and they end up burying them inside of an old moving truck underground. Now, the good news of the story is that all 26 children were returned home to their family, as well as the bus driver was returned home to his family. So they were returned, and that is good news. They actually were able to get themselves to safety. So I want to talk about what happened that day, the whole ordeal leading up to it. This was planned over a 1.5 year time period. There was a lot of work that went into this abduction, and it was completely failed. Yeah, there's a lot that goes here. So let me go and talk to you guys about that, and then I want to talk to you about the current parole situation in regards to the captors, because you're immediately thinking like they're in prison for life, right? No. So we're going to get into that at the end of the video. Let's talk about the timeline of what happened in 1976 first. Now, I've always been familiar with where Chowchilla is at. My dad's family is actually from there. It's going to be an area that's north of where I'm at in Central California. We're not quite at San Francisco. We're going to be about 2 to 3 hours south of San Francisco, and we are talking a very, very small farming community with a population currently probably around 15,000. Obviously, going back to the 1970s, the population in the area was well under 10,000. So all of the children during the summer, it's small. There's not a lot to do. So the children would typically go to summer school, which included a curriculum and then a fun activity in the afternoon. And this was something that was close to 200 children between the ages of 5 and 14 were participating in. Now, the bus afterwards was typically most of the smaller children because it is kind of a rural area. Some of them could get home on their own or get rides, but for the most part, the little kids are going to be riding the bus home. And there's several buses that are going to be taking them home each day. So this is going to be on a Thursday. It is July 15th of 1976, and it is the day before the last day of summer school. And so they're all riding the bus, and in the morning, they've done their curriculum, which includes some sort of math, English, science. And then in the afternoon on this Thursday, they got to go to the pool, which was located at the fairgrounds there. So all the kids that were able to go are now at the fairgrounds, and they're getting picked up from swimming, which is what they've been spending the afternoon doing. Now, the last bus to leave is driven by a bus driver by the name of Ed Ray. Ed Ray is driving his bus as he normally does. Ed Ray is known in the community. He's been driving a bus for a very long time. After farming in the area, he also grew up in the area. So they said that at some point in time, the grandchildren of his fellow students were kids that he was now transporting. That's how well he knew the community. So Ed's driving, and he's the last bus to leave, and he has several children on the bus with him. They leave at close to 4 to 4:15 p.m. on that Thursday from the fair. He goes and he makes his first 3 stops. And then the bus and all the children disappear. His parents start to call into the school immediately. If you are a parent, you've ever had a late bus, you've done this. You call, hey, what's going on? The bus late. Where's my kid? What's happening? Their first thought is Mr. Ray can't get in contact with us, so we need to go check on his route to see if he's had a breakdown. They go out and they check the area as calls continue to come in from worried parents saying that he hasn't made it to any of the stops after the first 3. Now there's a clear issue because the bus can't be found. They go and they check the whole route, and they're bewildered as well because the bus driver very specifically is never allowed to leave his route. They break down, they have to stay where they're broke down at. They're not allowed to leave the route just for these reasons. You have children, it's a liability. So once they realize they can't find the bus, they realize it's not broke down, now they're worried what's going on. So they send out people that are looking for the bus, trying to figure out what possibly could have gone on. What had happened was at about 4:15, after the bus had made its first 3 stops, Mr. Ray had come up to, I believe, a 4-way stop with a stop sign. And he gets up to it and he realizes that there is a white van parked in the middle and it has a hood up as if it's broke down. Mr. Ray was reported as being someone who would, of course, check on people. And so he kind of takes the bus and starts to go around, but he stops. He opens his door to ask, hey, do you need any help? And at that time, the bus is boarded. I was going to say aborted. 3 men boarded the bus. They are carrying guns and they have pantyhose over their head. Mr. Ray is obviously freaked out. He's an adult. He knows something is not right. The children are the ages 4 to 15, with most of them being on the younger end. Some of the children absolutely had no idea what was going on. The idea of seeing a masked gunman did not mean anything to them. They're just, okay, we're on our bus, what's going on? And they didn't even know how to respond. There was even a little girl that asked one of the masked gunmen, because he had the pantyhose over his head and then it had the little leg sticking out, if he was a bunny of some sort. So there was definite confusion, but the bus driver, Mr. Ray, was obviously trying to keep the children calm, trying to cooperate with the gunman in any way that he could to keep the children safe. So he's ordered to move out of the driver's seat, and one of the gunmen does take over control of the bus. Another gunman is now guarding the rest of the bus, and the third person is going to drive the other van, the white van that had been broke down. So now they're going to jump into the van and they're going to take off, and the bus is going to follow, and they're going to drive out and they're going to park this van in an area of brush. They call it a thicket. I've seen it referred to as many terms in the area of what they apply to this area. Not being from there, I'm going to call it kind of like it seemed marshy, woodsy, a bunch of old grown over grass area. I'm going to insert a picture, of course, for you guys. But this was an area that they took and they hid the bus there. So if you're driving, you might not see the bus. And in fact, they had to get into a helicopter and go overhead to actually see the bus when they found it. So this is what they do. They plan this out very clearly. They take the bus and they hide it. And then they loaded the children and the bus driver into 2 vans, being very careful not to leave any footprints on the ground coming from the bus to the vans. All of these things they did to not be discovered of who they were. So now 2 things are happening at the same time. The captors have all of the children in 2 vans and they are driving around. They are driving around nowhere near Chowchilla. Obviously they left the area and they're out driving around just killing time, because they had to wait until well after dark in order to go to the location that they were going to stash the children. And so at this time, now we're back at the police department. All of the worried parents are starting to gather. Ed Ray, the bus driver, his wife is there. There is a lot of people starting to ask a lot of questions. Of course, there is a consideration. Did the bus driver steal the children? Because that's the only adult who could have taken the children. And that was, of course, everyone thought about it for a second, but it was very easily dismissed that that was just not the type of character that Ed was. He didn't have any ability. He didn't have any thoughts like that. And in fact, I want to point out, there was a movie that was made in 1993 or 1994 called Vanished from the Road. I'll make sure I will link it for you. But I just want to be very clear. It does state at the beginning that this movie is made from true story, but that it's, a reenactment. It's not correct. And I just didn't like that in the movie they made it seem as if the bus driver was like annoyed with being a bus driver, that he was kind of over taking care of these kids because they were unruly and just out of control, and he had to yell at them to get them to listen. That was not at all the way that it was presented from the children who really liked Mr. Ray. That, he was funny and he took care of them and he was stern, but he kept them, safe, and he was a very caring, loving bus driver that they really liked. So I just want to warn, the movie does take a couple of very loose interpretations. So now while they're continuing to drive around, they are doing searches to try to find the bus. Because if you can find the bus, you can find the children. You have to figure out where the bus went. And hiding small children could be done, but hiding a bus is very difficult. So eventually they go up and they get aerial and they're able to find the bus, and they find that it's been very well hidden. And when they get there, they see that there are swimsuits and towels kind of thrown around because the kids had been at the pool that day. So there are things as they're getting off the bus, they're dropping some, taking some with them, but there's no footprints. But they do see that over the tire tracks for the bus, there is new tire tracks, as well as when they go onto the bus. Because now the bus, and they end at a certain point, so the bus had been driven in. Oh, my bracelet just fell off. The bus had been driven in further, and they could tell that for sure because there was absolutely no disturbing in the dust on the seats. Like where if children had been sitting on it when it was drove that far back in, that it wouldn't have left the dust on the seats. So that was just another way that they knew like they were put into something else. They were put into another vehicle and taken away near this area. Now, they did talk to some neighbors near that area and near where the children had been taken from. And there was talk that, yeah, we've seen 2 white vans, or maybe it's green vans. I think there was a question about the color of the vans. We've seen 2 vans driving around. So now they're thinking, okay, this is a possibility. This could be exactly who kidnapped the children. Now, from here forward, all the way until the children were found, police really, they're just dumbfounded. They do search upon search. They call in the FBI. This ends up being one of the largest manhunts ever. There had been a lot of talk about just 2 years prior, the kidnapping of Patty Hearst was recent. There was also in 1969, the letter from the Zodiac Killer, which had made reference to, I believe it said something like, I think I shall wipe out a school bus of children, pick them off one by one. Now later, the Zodiac did, by the way, in another letter saying, if you thought I was going to take on a bus of children like I said I would, then you deserve bullets in your head. You just don't know the Zodiac Killer. But anyways, this was adding to further scare that, whoa, could this be what's happening right now? And so obviously they're bringing in everyone they possibly can to help in finding these children. And they're waiting for a ransom call because everyone feels at this time, based on the fact that it's so many children, that there's got to be a ransom demand coming. And they're also confused because this is a small community, and it is not a wealthy community at all whatsoever. This is a farming community. They took care of each other and they all got by, but there wasn't a lot of wealth or excess money happening. So they're also trying to figure out who are they trying to ask for ransom. But police don't receive a ransom call, so they can't figure out what's going on. Now going back to the children in the vans. So they are actually in the 2 vans, split up into them. They're overcrowded. There's no food, there's no water, there's no bathrooms. And the windows are all covered. It's dark, it's late, and they had all of these children for 11 hours. I just want you to try to picture this. There was children as young as 4 and 5 years old. Try to picture a 4 or 5-year-old with other 4 or 5-year-olds stuck in back of a van, hot, cold, no food, no water, scared, confused, and just wanting to go home. So the children they got upset. They were crying, they were confused. Some of the children were having reactions to when they would pull over to add gasoline to the van because they just were carrying, canisters of gasoline. They would pull over to add more gasoline and the children were getting sick. There was children that had fainted. This just was too much for them. And so they drove them around. I just want you to understand, 11 hours. My video won't even be an hour. Do this 11 times as a child in the back of a van. It's traumatic. So they're driven around for 11 hours and then they arrive. Throughout the time, they're going over like rocks and bumpy areas. They have no idea where they're at. And eventually they arrive, I believe it's around 1 a.m, okay? And they arrive at a rock quarry. They don't know where they arrive at. And they're driven in and then they are taken out of the van one by one. Now for the children in the van and the bus driver, they have no idea what they're doing with these children one by one because they're taking them out one by one. So you have no idea what's happening to them and you're just waiting for your turn. As the children were brought out of the van, what they were doing is one by one, they were getting their full name, their address, their phone number, and a piece of personal belonging that they had, either a piece of clothing or something they had, so that they could use that for their ransom demand if they needed to verify that they had the children. A lot of planning went into this, like a lot. They then take each child one by one and they have them walk over to a hole in the ground, a hole in the dirt. And they look down in the hole and there's a ladder and a dark hole and they are told to climb down the ladder into the dark hole. One by one. 26 children between the ages of 4 and 14 years old. There was actually 19 girls and 7 boys. 26. So they lead them all down there. The last person is the bus driver, which is Ed Ray, and he is given 1 flashlight. Now, in the movie, it makes it seem like they make him strip down. It's 1 item. Everybody gave 1 item. It's from all the research I could find. And so I just want to clarify that as well in case you watch the movie. Once they're down in the hole, he turns on the flashlight, and there are mattresses in this hole. I'm going to make sure there are just so many pictures of the van. I'm just going to keep putting them all up for you so you can kind of see all of them. So the van has mattresses. It has in the back, a hole has been cut out in the ground to be used as a bathroom. There is a hole in the ceiling, I believe holes on the side that have tubes that are running up, out. They have no idea because remember, when they came in, they're in dirt. So they're in this moving van that has been buried in the ground. And they are left with water, some food, enough food to feed all of the children once. Enough water. I believe that it is even said that there was water left over after they were able to escape. But the ventilation. Okay, let me say the awkward part because I do not believe in any way, shape, or form these men should possibly ever be free because the risk that they put these children at and the risk that they took and how bad this could have been does not negate the fact at all just because they spent a little bit of time on trying to make sure that nothing happened to the children. They did try to ventilate the abandoned moving truck that they were using. So they buried it underground and then they had put dirt on top. When they realized that the dirt was causing it to cave in, they had put wood in order to secure it to keep it from falling in. When they realized that it needed a fan, they added a fan, they added ventilation. So on one hand, they did do the things necessary to keep the children alive by providing them with a mattress and a toilet and water and food. But if you kidnap a child, we're not going to get into semantics of whether or not you fed the child or didn't feed the child. You kidnapped them. But there is a difference, and that's going to come up when we're talking about the trial. So that's why I just have to talk, like this becomes a big deal in their sentencing. Now, police are continuing to search like crazy for the children. This is everywhere. It's all over the news. This is a huge deal about these missing children. And at the same time, the kidnappers are coming up with their plan. Also, at the same time, the children and the bus driver are starting to struggle inside of this moving van. The ventilation system just wasn't going to work. On top of that, you have 26 children. They're not going to handle this well. And there's a lot of movement that's happening inside of the moving van. These beams that they put there, they're getting moved. There's just a lot of problems with trying to keep that amount of children in a small space. The food is running out. They're getting upset. And so they realize they've got to try to find a way to get out. They know that somehow they just have to reach this metal plate that's up at the top. And if they can just get that metal plate and move it, then they can try to get out. So they take all the mattresses that are in there and they stack them up. And luckily, it's enough for them to be able to reach. So Ed and another student by the name of Michael, and there were some other students that were helping. But now the kid Michael actually wasn't supposed to be on that bus that day. The story's out there, so I'll go ahead and tell you because it's one of those stories that's worth hearing. So Michael and his friend, they used to go to summer school in the morning and then they didn't have to go in the afternoon to the activities. They would just go home and hang out. Well, him and his friend had decided to get drunk the day before, yes, at 15, and his mama had come home and caught him and he got in trouble. And so his punishment was that he had to stay at the after-school activities with the little kids and ride the bus home with the little kids. And so Michael was on the bus and Michael was strong enough and he was willing and he was able to get up there and he was able to try and pull and he was definitely helped Mr. Ray with being able to push through. The kids were helping out by pouring water on them, by doing everything they could to just push them through this exhaustion because it was starting to get hotter and hotter in there. The ventilation system was supposed to hold for up to 48 hours, but it was starting to fail. So before I tell you about the bad guys, the children do eventually escape. They are able to wiggle up just enough, and then they're able to use one of the wood that was holding up the from it caving in. I mean, it's caving in. You're seeing these pictures. The moving van is trying to cave in, and they take one of the boards that's holding it, like take that chance and use that board in order to help get that plate open. They get it open, dirt's following in, and they're able to get their hands in just a little bit. Now there's these two massive, I think they're RV batteries. They're well over 100 pounds each, and there's two massive ones that are sitting on top of this steel plate. And so not only do they have to get their hand through, but they have to, like, little by little keep nudging these batteries. And it takes them a long time between the bus driver and some students, and they're pushing and pushing and pushing. And eventually they're able to get it wedged just enough that they're able to get a brave little boy, one of the little ones, and have him go up through the hole and peek and look around. And at that time he looks around and the kidnappers are not there. They're gone. And they are able to get out and escape and run. Now, they end up coming across a guard shack because they're at a rock quarry. They're in a rock quarry, and they make it out to the guard shack. And there's two different stories that I've heard, by the way, but I believe it's more the second one. First, I heard that he's completely bewildered, but is going to offer them help. But mostly I heard that the exact quote was, he said, "The world has been looking for you." He knew exactly. You see 26 children and an adult running at you when the entire news has been covered. Yeah, you knew exactly who these children were. The whole ordeal was about 28 hours. They spent 11 hours in the vans driving around and 16 hours down inside. The rock quarry was in Livermore, California, which was over 100 miles from Chowchilla. So the guard calls police come, gets them, transport them to a nearby, actually a jail rehabilitation center. It was kind of the closest place they could take them all quickly. They take them there, they get them checked by doctors, they interview them, they're trying to make sure, what's going on, make sure, who did this, and get information they can about the kidnappers. And then they did return the children back to Livermore to their parents. I just want you to know that. What do you think the worst mode of transportation would be for 26 children who just got kidnapped on a bus? They put them on a bus. They did. This was like 1976, and this has been mentioned in a lot of people who cover the story that, like, we just didn't have therapy like we do now. There wasn't any consideration on that. It was very much you fell off the horse, you get back on the horse. And so you got kidnapped off a bus, get back on the bus, you'll be just fine. But they were taken back home. I mean, this is just what people did back then. And the children, from knowledge that I've seen, did not receive any sort of therapy or grief counseling or anything like that. They were taken on a Disneyland trip by the Lions Club, and then some donations were made to the retirement of Ed Wright. So that was kind of how people dealt with traumas in consideration of PTSD. It was definitely a trip to Disneyland and some extra money for your retirement, which was all very much appreciated. And I'm sure it did help. There wasn't a lot of people that really thought of anything else back then. So it was something that they could do. So let's talk the kidnappers, right? Because who the hell are these guys? So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at the rock quarry. Because there's a buried moving van buried under the ground. So somebody had to have access for a long period of time at this rock quarry in order to build this without anybody knowing. So they're interviewing and they're like, yeah, we saw somebody building. It's the owner's son, him and his friends. About this time, they're realizing that this son has keys, has access. Also, him and his friends have already had some trouble with the law in regards to some schemes and some robberies. So there's some talk about, could it possibly be them? Police then go to the home of 24-year-old Frederick Woods, and he is the son of the rock quarry's owner. Now, he lives with his parents, so they go to their home, they do a search. They are able to find one of the guns that was used in the kidnapping of the children, and they also find a ransom note. So it was a ransom. I gotta tell you guys this part. This is, you can't even imagine this, right? So they had a ransom note, and it looked like it's a draft. So you're thinking, well, why didn't they ever call in the ransom? They did. They tried. They drove around for hours from payphone to payphone to payphone. And the reason they had buried the children was that they needed all three of them to collect the ransom. And so they needed them to be somewhere that they wouldn't be harmed, but they would be out of sight. And the plan was to get the ransom, which needed all three of them. And then once they had the ransom, they would give the location of the children and they would be returned. But they never called in the ransom. And that's because they drove around for hours Hours going from payphone to payphone trying to phone the Chowchilla Police Department. However, the phone lines back then couldn't handle the calls that were coming in from all of the reporters all over the world, as well as the parents worried about their children. The phone lines were busy. They couldn't get through. They had this big plan to ask for $5 million. Now, the reason they were going to ask for $5 million, because this is not, none of these parents had this kind of money. But recently it had been released that California had a budget surplus. And so they really thought that if they took children, that because children are precious in their words, that they would be able to get $5 million out of the budget surplus because they would want to pay for the children. Their thought at first when they started considering all these plans of what they could do was like, hey, if we took one person, we'll get some money. But if we take a lot of people, we'll get a lot of money. If we take children, they'll pay it for sure. There's no way not to. Interesting thoughts. So apparently they drive around trying to request this ransom, and they decide to go home and write a note. But now they have to figure out what to write in this note. And so it looks like this, like a draft of it. And then they have to figure out how they're going to deliver this said ransom note to the police department. And that was a lot of thinking, and they'd been driving all night. So they took a nap. Thank God, right? Makes you thankful for idiots. I mean, honestly. But that's the thing that is so intriguing to me, honestly, and that's I just have to say, because they went above and beyond with their plan. I still need to talk about the brothers. Let me tell you about this first, and then I'll explain who the two brothers are that were with Fred. So Fred had purchased an x-ray machine so that once he got the money, he would be able to x-ray it to see if there was any sort of anything shoved inside of it. He'd also got a steel box made that was going to house the money in case there were any dye packs inside of it. He had also gotten a storage unit in San Diego, which is where he was going to transport the money to. He had also bought a moving van to be buried in, which he stupidly had put in his own name. There were several things that he had done in order to make this plan go perfectly and smoothly. The thing is that it's really obvious that he was inspired by movies. Him and his friends were really into true crime. They wanted to make movies. And one of the movies that inspired them was the 1971 movie Dirty Harry with Clint Eastwood, where he's a cop and he's chasing after these bad guys. And there's a part in the movie where the bad guys take a hostage a bus of kids. And so when they're trying to think of well, we could take a lot of kids. Oh, we could do a bus. I saw it in a movie. It kind of came from that. So these three guys. So first we have Frederick Woods, who is 24 years old, and his father is the owner of the rock quarry. And then we have two brothers, and their father is a podiatrist. So James Scofield is also 24, like Fred, and then his younger brother Richard is 22. Now, again, these men have access to money. Their father is a respected podiatrist who makes a lot of money in the area, but they had got themselves into all these debt from just trying to take on things that they couldn't accomplish, and then they couldn't pay back the debt. And their parents weren't just giving them so much access to their money if they weren't going to do anything with it. And this was the big plan they came up with to do it. I know, it's kind of disappointing when you get to the end and you're like, wait, so it was just some rich kids who wanted money, so they were willing to bury children underground alive. Yeah. And the fact that they didn't quite understand the gravity of what they were doing is just ridiculous. So let's talk about how convictions happen for kidnapping. So in this case, there are two things to be looked at. There is kidnapping by ransom, and there is a sort of kidnapping by force or kidnapping with bodily injury. Kidnapping is horrible, okay? So we're having this conversation because we just need to understand the legality of it. And it's not my opinion, which is that it's the right way to do it. It's just legally the way it is or was at the time. So in the 1970s when this happened, the rule in California is that kidnapping for ransom, just for ransom, which means I pick you up, I take you over here, and I hold you here for money, and then I give you back for money, had a minimum sentence of 7 years. So if all 26 plus the bus driver, all 27, were kidnapped for ransom, then it would be a minimum of 7 years per, which already ends up well over life. However, you have the possibility of parole. Now, kidnapping with bodily harm. So if I hit you and take you, or I take you and then hit you, I have caused you bodily harm. So I've added an element of harm and showing that I'm going to harm people for harm and not just for money, then you're a harmful person, and that is an automatic life without parole. So Fred and the two brothers were sentenced originally to life without parole. They took a plea, so they didn't actually have to go to trial. They took a plea, but they stipulated that they didn't agree to one part that they could argue with later. So they basically, we are pleading guilty to kidnapping for the ransom. We're not agreeing to whether or not we committed bodily harm, which will determine whether or not we actually have a chance at parole. So later on, it was overturned and they were given the possibility of parole. So they started having parole hearings for years and years. I believe I saw one newscaster said there had been over 80 parole hearings between the three of them. Now, the youngest brother, Richard, he actually turned himself into the police and confessed to what he had done within a couple of days of July 15th, 1976, when the kidnapping happened. Richard was considered to be a youthful offender per law. There was consideration for offenders under the age of 23. You're young. You are subject to make mistakes, and doesn't mean that you are a harmful person legally. I know what you guys are all thinking. I know you're thinking, Melissa, are you like okay with like letting out kidnappers? No, I'm not. It's just I don't know how if we can ever like. Richard was 22. He says that he didn't even realize they were really going to do it. Like he thought it was just kind of this something to do because they're rich kids and like maybe they'll make a movie out of it. And he confessed, and he had a lot of play in making sure that there was ventilation and food, and so he never meant to harm. He just wanted to get money. So does someone like that ever deserve a chance, or do they really need to spend like 70, 80 years forever until they die in prison? And so I don't have the answer on that one, you guys. Like just so we're clear, I'm always conflicted a little bit. Never in the beginning, but when it gets to like that 60, 70 years, I'm just like, what are we doing with people? Like, anyways, he ended up receiving parole in 2012 for good behavior. He located back to San Francisco area outside of San Francisco, where he is living with his mother and is abiding by rules. It is reported that while in prison, he was a model citizen. He is regretful and remorseful for what he did and would never do it again, and feels poorly about the decision that he made. He feels like he was young and just made a dumb mistake. It's way more than that. Like, you traumatize children that left long-lasting. There's never enough time, really. There isn't, for what you did. But he does seem to be of no harm to anyone at this time, supposedly, reportedly. Now, his brother James was granted parole in 2016. I'm not sure where he's at. There wasn't a follow-up on him, but it is reported that while he was in jail, he was also a model citizen and was remorseful for what had happened and did not feel that it was okay for what they did and did not justify it in any way. Now let's talk about Fred Woods. As far as the other two, a parole board met with them and made a legal decision that they were eligible to be released. And it's already been done. It can't be undone. It is what it is. They've been released. And at this time, they had not been a harm to anyone in the public. And hopefully they remain that way. But Mr. Fred Woods, who is considered to be the mastermind of all of this was his father's rock quarry. The ransom note was at his home, obviously. Now, while the one brother had turned himself in, the other brother was reportedly on his way to turn himself in, was arrested. Mr. Woods, though, was gone. He was in Canada. The brother James tried to get to Canada, but like he didn't have enough money to get in, and then he had a gun with him, so like he wasn't getting into Canada. And then that's when he eventually goes and tries to turn himself in or gets caught. But Fred immediately got into Canada, and that's where he was. And he would have been a lot harder to find, except for he wrote a letter back to a friend. I believe it was to let him know he was safe. I also believe that it was him asking for some help. But he had really set himself up. He had money, he had a plan, he took off, and he did not think he was going to get captured. But he was. So he was arrested and brought in. Now, the thing about Fred is that he's never really been remorseful. While the children were in the vans, I told you they were getting sick. They were throwing up. They were nauseous. They didn't feel well. They were hot. They were cold. They were crying. But at times, this 11 hours. At times, you know, the older kids would try to make the younger kids smile or try to sing them a song or just try to distract them. At one point, they were singing If You're Happy and You Know It, but doing it as if you're sad and you know it, clap your hands. And they sing a lot of different songs. Love will lead you there, I believe. It just things that were trying to calm the children down. But Fred, in front of the parole hearing, said they were fine. They were even singing songs. They were never hurt the whole time. I made sure they were taken care of. They had food. They were fine. They were giggling and laughing and singing songs. And then he said, and if anyone tells you different, they're remembering it wrong. No, man. You are wrong. On top of the fact that he is still belittling what he did by not fully accepting how much harm this is, because he's just trying to fight the bodily harm. Because if you prove that there was no bodily harm, then it becomes a kidnapping for ransom case. But where does it become physical harm? So yes, the bus driver hurt his finger at one point, and a kid scraped their knee, and some kids fainted, and some kids might have thrown up. So if we don't consider that bodily harm, what about being buried underneath with failing ventilation? That's considered. What about being buried underneath without sufficient food if you had not escaped on your own? So because they didn't beat the children or strike them with their weapons, it's considered that they didn't have any bodily injury, and therefore they're eligible for parole. So he is eligible for parole. He was denied in 2019. He will be up again in 2024, and it is said that he will never get out. He will never get out because he will never be a model citizen. I told you at the beginning that these guys were wealthy. This guy is wealthy. I know that there's like women out there who purposely like make pen pals with guys in jail. So like if anyone wants to like take him for all his money, I'm not saying you should. But it would be great, and then just give it all to the victims. The victims did actually sue, and in 2016, I believe it was, there was an undisclosed settlement that was paid out of Fred Woods' estate. So it is reported, his attorney denies it, but it is reported that Fred Woods is worth $100 million. Like money, not a little money. He purchased a mansion 30 minutes from the prison where he's at that he has never seen. He's had 3 wives while he's been in there. He has owned multiple businesses, which in California you can do, or could do. I'm not sure if you still can. You can run a business while in prison. I think this is to protect you for any of your businesses that you have going so they don't fall apart. But you have to ask permission, which he did not. He was running a Christmas tree business. He was also running a gold digging business. He had a lot going on. So in 2015 or 16, I think it's 15. In 2015, Inside Edition did an interview where they took survivors, and I think it was 6 or 9 women from the survivors of the kidnapping, and took them back to visit the bus. And while they were there, they talked, they shared their stories. You know, they basically said that they don't want him to ever get out of prison. One was interviewed. She said, I think he should die right where he's at. And they took their time. They signed the bus. They made sure to write notes to Mr. Ray. And the bus driver did pass away, I believe, in 2012. And a lot of his students had come by to see him in his last days. They loved him. There was a day that was dedicated to him. They did a float during a parade at one point in time. There was a lot of love for this man in the community for saving the children. And to this day, if you go to Chowchilla's website, the kidnapping and Ed Ray Day is right there front and center. So after these women say this, then there's a parole hearing in 2019, and to everyone's surprise, one of the victims of the kidnapping testified in defense of Fred Woods. Now, there was another survivor that had met with one of the captors, I believe Richard, the youngest one, the one that had already turned himself in, and he said it was a really, truly good experience, that he really got to talk to Richard and how remorseful Richard was, and it was good for him, and it helped him to heal. But this was really unexpected, because this was the woman who had said literally just a few years prior that she felt that he should die right where he is. I'm not saying the name of the survivor because I just feel I don't want to add any extra grief to anyone. If you want to go look it up, you can. Obviously, it's linked down below. But that's why I'm not. Sometimes you guys realize I leave out names. I do it on purpose. That way, people who don't really want to go look won't go look. and add any harm to anyone's family. So anyways, this one victim, that specifically said in the interview that he should die where he's at, is now testifying on his behalf. And when she's interviewed outside of the court, she's kind of, in my opinion, slightly erratic, and she's mad. And I don't know what happened prior, why she's so riled up, but they're asking her, like, why did you just testify on his behalf for him to be released? And she's like, God told me to because I needed closure. Okay. However, another victim said that she had been contacted by a prior member of the police department that was part of this case. Again, you can go look it up. Yeah, so much. So a prior officer involved in the case had come to her and offered her monetary payment if she would testify for, or like make a recommendation at parole for Fred Woods to be released. And she said, absolutely not. So there have been a lot of rumors. We're talking a very small town. It's still only like 15,000 people in this town. And so there's a lot of talk that this was happening, that people were being offered money in order to go and try to get him out because he comes from money. I did see, I believe in 2019 or early 2020, Inside Edition did say, I believe that's who it was. It'll be linked. It said that because of this, all of this talk about these possible payments, that they are looking into a possibility that Fred Wood might be trying to encourage his parole hearing through payouts. So they'll look into it. Now, I did mention that they did get a settlement. The survivors did get a settlement in 2016, and that was paid out of Fred Woods' estate. The statement that was released about it, because it was an undisclosed amount of money, was that it was enough money for a lot of therapy, but not quite enough money to buy a house. So they did receive a good settlement of money just to try and help with them through therapy. There was a lot of these people that ended up in bad situations, including addictions and poor choices and legal troubles and law troubles. And so, yeah, they weren't left with no trauma. You can't. That is a scary situation to ever go through. Several of them have written books or blogs or certain things to share their memories of what happened. I will link everything that I can find for you guys down below. And if you come across any more links, add them to my comments for me, please. I want to know what you guys find. Okay, so here's what I have to know for you guys. You've got to tell me your opinion. If they kidnapped the children for money and for money only, and they never harmed them, they provided food, water, shelter, never, ever, ever harmed them, and returned them safely. Is that life? Is that, especially when we're talking about young 20-year-olds, forever? Or do you look at the fact that Richard and James seem to be incredibly remorseful and lived a very legal life in prison and abided by the rules and have continued to abide by the rules since? Whereas you have someone like Fred Woods who is not even willing to abide by the rules or really take any sort of real responsibility for what he did. Is that when we don't give parole? Is that what we want? Do we want to lock everyone up? I don't know. I mean, maybe if we released all the people that were in prison over small amounts of weed, that's legal almost everywhere, I bet we would have more room. And maybe we could keep all the kidnappers forever. Probably make for a much happier world. Anyways, food for thought. So that's what I have for you guys on today's video. I appreciate you guys so much for being here from the bottom of my heart. This was a crazy story. I immediately called my dad and asked my dad, but my dad and his family had already moved away about 5 or 6 years prior to this happening because he was now in high school. And he's like, yeah, I remember hearing about it. I called my aunt. She's like, yeah, that was the craziest thing. Everyone was talking about it. Like we were watching the news and when that was going down, and it's just such a small town. That was the other thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning. They considered other towns because they're from San Francisco, but they wanted to choose somewhere that was far enough away from them, but also close to the rock quarry. So they had considered Merced, which is another small town, but it didn't work out. And then they went with Chowchilla. They had tried the day before on July 14th, 1976, but they had missed the bus. They missed the bus that they were trying to steal. So they came back the next day on July 15th of 1976, and that's when they took the bus in Chowchilla. So absolutely crazy story. I am just, especially you guys that like are just legally even more knowledgeable than I am, How do we decide when somebody should be paroled or not? And how do we decide what bodily injury is? Because those children bodies were harmed. You took their body and you made them uncomfortable. That's enough for me. You make my kid uncomfortable, that's enough. And by making them nauseous and sick and scared and traumatized, that's enough. In the end, they really only said that the 2 children that, fainted really experienced much physical harm. So what a world 1976 was. That's what I have for you guys. Thank you guys so much for being with me. Do me a favor, leave a like, leave a comment. I love it. I really appreciate it. If you guys have been here watching this premiere with me, thank you. I know a lot of you guys don't realize that it's not a live video. The video is recorded a couple days prior. I edit it up and then I load it in, but then I set it up with a live premiere so that we can chat in the comments. And that's how I do all of my videos. So make sure you join us when the video goes up. I typically post it by that morning, giving it at least 4 to 5 hours lead up. You can set a reminder and then it'll let you know that the video is coming up. But I do think you have to make sure you have your notifications turned on. So like, comment, subscribe, set notifications, and then check my channel. And then I will have a new video out and then you click set reminder and it'll let you know when my premiere is coming up. That's a lot. Just check out with me all the time. I think that's what I have for you guys. So say this at the end of every one of my videos. Hug your babies, mask up, stay safe. We're not out of the pandemic yet. Mask up, stay safe. We even have little mask earrings today. Yes, stay safe, get your vaccine. Hug your babies and hug your loves. Life is literally precious. Enjoy every minute of every day. Do not take anything for granted. I love you. I'll see you in my next video. Bye, guys.
I'm just good at caring too much. I'm just good at caring too much.